The entire prison yard went silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Card games froze. Even the guards on the towers turned to look. Big Hawk, the most feared man in cell block D, stood over the new inmate with his fists clenched, veins bulging in his thick neck. His shadow covered the old man sitting calmly on the bench below him. "Old man, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." The threat hung in the air like a death sentence. In Iron Gate Penitentiary, those words meant blood was about to be spilled. Everyone knew what came next when Big Hawk issued a warning like that. Broken bones. Hospital trips. Sometimes worse. But the man sitting calmly on the bench didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He didn't beg. He simply looked up with eyes that had seen things most men couldn't imagine, and said, "Sometimes the biggest mistake is thinking you're the toughest person in the room." The inmates watching held their breath. Nobody talked to Big Hawk like that. Nobody. 3 seconds of silence followed. Then it happened. One movement. So fast most people didn't even see it clearly. 3 seconds later, Big Hawk was unconscious on the concrete, blood pooling beneath his shattered face. The yard erupted in chaos. Inmates rushed forward. Guards screamed into their radios. Alarms started blaring, and the old man, he just stood up, dusted off his orange jumpsuit, and walked away like nothing had happened. And what happened next changed that prison forever. It was a cold Tuesday morning at Iron Gate Penitentiary, one of the toughest maximum security prisons in the entire country, the kind of place where hope went to die. Razor wire coiled along the tops of 30-foot concrete walls. Guard towers stood at every corner, armed with rifles and searchlights. The air itself felt heavy, thick with tension and the weight of 1,000 broken dreams. Guards marched inmates through the yard in rigid lines. Gangs controlled specific corners like territories on a war map. Violence wasn't just common here. It was the language everyone spoke. Respect was earned through fear. Power was measured in scars. And at the very top of the food chain, Big Hawk, 6'5", 270 pounds of pure muscle. His arms were covered in scars and tattoos that told stories of every fight he'd won, every man he'd broken. His face looked like it had been carved from stone, hard, cruel, with eyes that showed no mercy. He'd been inside Iron Gate for 12 years, and in that time, he'd broken more bones than the prison doctor could count. Some inmates whispered that he'd killed 3 men in here. Others said it was more. Nobody knew for sure. Nobody dared to ask. He ran everything in cell block D, the commissary, protection rackets, gambling rings. He decided who ate well and who went hungry, who stayed safe and who got hurt. Even some of the guards were on his payroll, looking the other way when he needed them to. If you crossed Big Hawk, you had 2 options: disappear into solitary for your own protection, or end up in the infirmary. Or worse. Most inmates learned quickly: keep your head down, pay your tribute, survive. That was the unspoken rule of Iron Gate. That Tuesday morning, everything seemed normal. The same gray sky, the same cold wind cutting through the yard, the same hopeless faces shuffling from cell to cafeteria to yard and back again. Then, at exactly 8:47 a.m., a white transport van pulled up to the main gate. The heavy steel doors groaned open with a mechanical screech that echoed across the courtyard. 2 guards climbed out first, hands on their batons, eyes scanning the area. Then they opened the back door of the van, and out stepped a man who didn't look like he belonged here. He was in his 60s, maybe older, graying hair pulled back neatly, a weathered face that showed years of life experience etched into every line. But his eyes were different. Calm, clear, focused, no fear, no anger, no desperation, just presence. He wore the same bright orange jumpsuit as everyone else, standard issue, but something about the way he carried himself made it look almost dignified. He didn't shuffle like the other inmates. He didn't look at the ground or hunch his shoulders. He walked with his back straight, his head up, moving with a quiet confidence that seemed completely out of place in this hellhole. It was like watching a master walk into a room full of amateurs. The guards led him through processing, and the whole time, he said nothing. He answered their questions politely, followed their instructions without complaint, and never once showed any sign of worry. His name was Seagal. The rumor was that he'd been framed. Something about a business deal gone wrong, corporate espionage, powerful enemies pulling strings from the outside. Some said he'd uncovered corruption in a major company, and they'd planted evidence to silence him. Others whispered it was a vendetta, someone with money and connections who wanted him buried alive. But nobody knew the full story. The legal system had chewed him up and spit him out, and now here he was, walking into one of the most dangerous prisons in America. All the inmates saw was an old man, and in prison, that made you easy prey. Fresh meat. Someone yelled from across the yard as Stephen was escorted toward his cell block. Laughter erupted from a group of inmates near the basketball court. "Yo, somebody get Grandpa a walker. He won't last a week." More laughter. Cruel, mocking sounds that bounced off the concrete walls. Stephen didn't react. He kept walking, eyes forward, expression neutral. Big Hawk was leaning against the chain link fence near the weight area, surrounded by his crew, 6 loyal enforcers who followed him everywhere. He watched the new arrival with cold, calculating eyes. One of his men nudged him. "Yo, Hawk, check out the old dude." Hawk tilted his head, studying Stephen like a predator sizing up wounded prey. "Another old fool who thinks he's tough," he muttered, a cruel smile spreading across his scarred face. "Give him a week. Hell, give him 3 days. He'll be begging me for protection." His crew laughed on cue. "What you think, Hawk? Should we welcome him proper?" One of them asked, cracking his knuckles. Hawk shook his head slowly. "Nah, let him settle in first. Let him think he's safe." He grinned wider. "Then we break him." Stephen was assigned to cell block D, Big Hawk's territory, of course. The guards led him through the common area, past rows of tables where inmates played cards, lifted weights, or just sat staring at nothing. Every eye followed him. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who's the old guy?" "Man, he's dead meat. Hawk's gonna eat him alive." The guards didn't warn him. They knew exactly what was coming, and they didn't care. One of them, a thick-necked man with a permanent sneer, even smirked as he unlocked Stephen's cell. "Good luck, old-timer. You're gonna need it." Stephen stepped inside the small concrete box that would be his home. A metal bunk, a stainless steel toilet, a tiny sink, bare walls. He set down his small bundle of belongings, a toothbrush, a bar of soap, 1 change of clothes. Then he sat on the edge of the bunk, placed his hands on his knees, and closed his eyes. He took a slow, deep breath in through his nose, held it, released it slowly through his mouth. Meditation. Centering, preparation. Prison didn't scare him. He'd survived wars most people had never heard of. He'd faced armed enemies in dark alleys and hostile territories. He'd walked through fire and come out the other side. This was just another test. And Stephen Seagal had never failed a test he couldn't handle. The next morning, Stephen woke at 5:30 a.m., just like he had every morning for the past 40 years. Discipline wasn't something that disappeared just because you were behind bars. He did 50 push-ups on the cold concrete floor. 50 sit-ups. Stretches to keep his body limber and ready. By the time the morning bell rang at 6:00 a.m., he was already dressed and waiting. Breakfast was a grim affair in the cafeteria: watery oatmeal, stale bread, coffee that tasted like dirt. Stephen ate in silence at an empty table near the back, ignoring the stares and whispers around him. He could feel the tension building. The way certain inmates kept glancing his way. The way Big Hawk's crew sat at their table in the center of the room, laughing too loud, making sure everyone knew they owned this place. After breakfast came yard time, 1 hour of fresh air and freedom before the grind of prison labor began. Most inmates used the time to lift weights, play cards, form their little groups and alliances. Others just paced the perimeter like caged animals, burning off energy and frustration. Stephen walked calmly to the yard, taking in his surroundings with the trained eye of someone who'd been in dangerous situations before. He noted the exits, the blind spots, the guard positions, the social hierarchies playing out in real time. Then he walked to a quiet bench near the basketball court, away from the main clusters of inmates, and sat down. He closed his eyes, tilted his face toward the weak morning sun, and just breathed. For a few moments there was almost peace. Then he heard the voice. "Yo, old man." Big Hawk's voice boomed across the yard like thunder, cutting through every conversation. The entire yard seemed to freeze. Inmates stopped mid-sentence. Guards turned their heads. Even the basketball game stuttered to a halt. Stephen opened his eyes slowly and looked up. Big Hawk was walking toward him with that signature swagger, shoulders rolling, chest out, flanked by his crew of 6 enforcers. They moved like a wolf pack, spreading out to form a semicircle around the bench. Hawk stopped directly in front of Stephen, towering over him, blocking out the sun. His massive shadow swallowed Stephen whole. "You sitting in my spot." His voice was low, dangerous, carrying a threat that didn't need to be spoken. Stephen looked up at him calmly, no fear in his eyes whatsoever. "I didn't see your name on it." The yard went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the concrete. Nobody, and I mean nobody, talked back to Big Hawk. Not the gang leaders, not the lifers, not even the guards pushed him too far. Hawk's crew exchanged glances, some of them grinning, already anticipating what was about to happen. One of them muttered under his breath, "Oh, this fool just signed his death warrant." Big Hawk's jaw clenched. His nostrils flared. He took another step closer, his boots now inches from Stephen's feet. "Maybe you got a hearing problem, Grandpa." "I said that's my bench." His voice was rising now, loud enough for everyone in the yard to hear. This wasn't just about a bench. This was about dominance. About showing the entire prison who was in charge. Stephen didn't move. He didn't stand up. He didn't even tense. He just looked Hawk straight in the eye and said, "Calm as morning water. Then I guess we're sharing it today." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Some inmates actually gasped. Hawk's crew started laughing, but it was nervous laughter, the kind that comes when you're not quite sure what you're witnessing. One of them muttered, "Man, is this dude crazy or suicidal?" Big Hawk's face twisted into something ugly. His pride was wounded. His authority was being challenged in front of everyone. And in prison, that could not stand. "You think this is funny?" Hawk growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Stephen's expression didn't change. "No. I think you're trying very hard to prove something you don't need to prove." That was it. That was the line. Hawk reached down and grabbed Stephen by the collar of his jumpsuit, yanking him up off the bench with frightening strength. Their faces were inches apart now. Hawk's breath was hot and smelled like cheap cigarettes and rage. "Listen, old man," Hawk snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "I run this yard. I run this block. I run this whole damn prison. You don't talk to me like that, unless you want to end up in the infirmary with tubes coming out of you." Stephen's expression still didn't change. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that comes from a man who's faced death and didn't blink. "Let go of my shirt." Hawk blinked, momentarily thrown off by the sheer audacity. "Or what? Or you'll regret it." For just a split second, one tiny fleeting moment, something flickered in Big Hawk's eyes. Uncertainty. Then it was gone, replaced by pure fury. Big Hawk threw his head back and laughed loud, mocking, theatrical. "You hear this guy?" he shouted to the entire yard. "He's threatening me?" His crew joined in, laughing on command, slapping their knees, playing their part in the performance. The other inmates watched in tense silence, some looking away, not wanting to witness what was about to happen. A few guards stood near the fence, hands on their belts, but they didn't intervene. They never did when Hawk was making an example of someone. Hawk shoved Stephen hard, sending him stumbling back onto the bench. "I'll tell you what, Grandpa," Hawk said, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "I'm gonna give you one day. One single day to figure out how things work here." He leaned down, his face close again. "Tomorrow you're gonna come find me. You're gonna apologize. And you're gonna give me half of whatever you got in commissary. Every single week, you understand me." The yard was silent, everyone waiting for Stephen's response. This was the moment where most inmates crumbled. Where they nodded, mumbled an apology, accepted their fate. But Stephen Seagal wasn't most inmates. He stood up slowly, deliberately, dusting off his orange jumpsuit with calm, precise movements. Then he looked Big Hawk straight in the eye, no fear, no submission, no hesitation, and said, "I don't apologize to bullies. And I don't pay for protection I don't need." The entire yard seemed to collectively hold its breath. Even some of Hawk's crew looked uncomfortable now, shifting their weight, unsure if their boss was about to do something crazy. Big Hawk's jaw clenched so hard you could see the muscles twitching in his cheeks. His hands balled into fists the size of sledgehammers. His pride wasn't just wounded now, it was shattered. In front of everyone. "All right, tough guy," Hawk said, his voice low and deadly serious now. "You just signed your death warrant." He turned to his crew, jerking his head toward the cell block. "Showers. 3 o'clock. His meaning was crystal clear. Showers were where scores got settled. No cameras. Guards conveniently looking the other way. Plenty of places to hide a body if it came to that. We'll see how tough he really is. Hawk pointed one massive finger at Stephen's chest. "You better say your prayers tonight, old man, because tomorrow you're mine." Then he turned and walked away, his crew falling in behind him like loyal soldiers. The yard slowly came back to life, whispers, nervous conversations, inmates shaking their heads in disbelief. Stephen stood there for a moment, watching them go. Then he simply sat back down on the bench, closed his eyes again, and returned to his meditation. As if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just challenged the most dangerous man in the entire prison. One of the older inmates, a gray-haired man named Marcus who'd been in Iron Gate for 20 years, walked past and muttered under his breath, "You got guts, man. But guts don't mean nothing when you're dead." Stephen opened one eye and glanced at him. "Sometimes," Stephen said quietly, "guts are all you need." Marcus shook his head and walked away. Stephen closed his eyes again. He had one day to prepare, and he'd been preparing for moments like this his entire life. The next day, tension hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Everyone in Cell Block D knew what was coming. It was written in the sideways glances. in the nervous energy crackling through the common area, in the way inmates suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else when 3 o'clock approached. Word had spread through the entire prison overnight. Big Hawk was going to make an example of the old man. The showers. 3 o'clock. No witnesses. No mercy. Inmates whispered in corners, placing bets on how long Stephen would last. 5 seconds, one said. Nah, man. 2 minutes tops. Hawk likes to play with his food. Either way, that old dude is dead bite. The guards knew too. They always knew. Some of them exchanged knowing glances during breakfast. Others checked their watches more frequently, timing their rounds to make sure they'd be conveniently absent when the violence started. That's how it worked at Irongate. The guards maintained order where it mattered, but when it came to prison justice, they turned a blind eye, kept the strong inmates happy, kept the peace through fear. Even the warden seemed to expect it, seemed to accept it as the cost of running a place like this. Stephen went about his routine as if nothing was different. Breakfast, watery oatmeal toast, coffee. He ate slowly, methodically, ignoring the stares from across the cafeteria. Yard time, he walked the perimeter alone, stretching his muscles, moving through slow, deliberate martial arts forms that most inmates mistook for old man exercises. Work detail. He was assigned to the laundry, folding prison uniforms in silence while other inmates whispered and pointed. He didn't avoid Big Hawk. He didn't hide in his cell. He didn't ask for protective custody. He simply existed, calm and unbothered, like a man who had already made peace with whatever was coming. Around 2:30, one of the older inmates, Marcus, the same man who'd warned him the day before, approached him in the laundry room. Man, you still got time, Marcus said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. You go to the guards right now, tell them you need PC, protective custody, they'll move you out of here. Stephen folded another uniform, creasing the edges with precise movements. I appreciate the concern, he said calmly, but I'm not running. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. Running ain't cowardice, man, it's survival. You don't understand what Hawk's gonna do to you. Stephen looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes with a steady gaze. I understand perfectly. Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. All right, man, it's your funeral. He walked away, shaking his head. Stephen finished folding the last uniform, placed it neatly on the stack, and checked the clock on the wall. 20:55 p.m., 5 minutes. He took a slow, deep breath, centering himself the way he'd done 1,000 times before fights, before missions, before moments where life and death balanced on a razor's edge. Then he walked toward the showers. The shower room was at the far end of cell block D, a large, tiled space with 10 shower heads along the walls and a single entrance, no windows, no cameras, just white tile, rusted drains, and the echo of water against concrete. Stephen pushed open the door and stepped inside. Steam already filled the air from the hot water pipes that ran constantly, creating a thick fog that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The sound of water dripping echoed off the walls, mixing with the hum of the old ventilation system overhead. Stephen walked to the center of the room and turned on one of the faucets. Hot water sprayed down, soaking his orange jumpsuit, plastering his gray hair to his head. He stood under the stream, eyes closed, breathing slowly, preparing his mind and body for what was about to happen. Then he heard them. Footsteps. Heavy, multiple. The door slammed open with a metallic being that echoed through the tile. Stephen opened his eyes but didn't turn around. He reached up and turned off the water. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive, broken only by the sound of boots on wet tile. Big Hawk entered first, his massive frame filling the doorway like a mountain blocking out the sun. Behind him came his crew, 6 men, all armed with makeshift weapons. Shivs made from sharpened toothbrushes, filed down until the plastic edges could puncture skin. A sock filled with batteries, heavy enough to crack bone. A razor blade melted into the handle of a comm. Prison ingenuity at its most brutal. The door slammed shut behind them with a heavy seal-enge, followed by the sound of something being wedged against it from the outside. They were locked in. No one was getting out until this was finished. Big Hawk cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing off the tile like gunshots. His face was a mask of cruel satisfaction. Thought you could disrespect me and just walk away. Hawk growled, his voice reverberating through the steam-filled room. Stephen turned slowly to face them, water dripping from his hair, running down his face. He looked calm, almost serene. I didn't disrespect you, Stephen said quietly. I just didn't bow to you. Hawk's face twisted with rage. Same thing in here, old man. Same damn thing. He stepped forward, his crew fanning out to surround Stephen, cutting off any possible escape. Not that Stephen looked like he was planning to run. He stood perfectly still in the center of the room, hands loose at his sides, weight balanced evenly on both feet. Hawk cracked his neck, rolling his massive shoulders. Last chance, Grandpa. Get down on your knees. Apologize. Kiss my boots. Maybe I'll only break one arm instead of both. His crew laughed, the sound harsh and ugly in the enclosed space. Stephen didn't move. Didn't flinch. His voice was steady, almost sad. I've been in worse situations than this. The laughter stopped. Hawk's crew exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. Something about the way Stephen said it, the absolute confidence, the complete lack of fear, made them hesitate. But Big Hawk was too far gone, too committed. His pride on the line? Worse than this? Hawk sneered. Old man, you're about to meet your maker. He lunged forward with frightening speed for a man his size. A heavy right hook aimed directly at Stephen's jaw, thrown with enough force to shatter bone. It was the kind of punch that had put dozens of men in the infirmary. The kind of punch that ended fights before they began. But Stephen wasn't there anymore. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his age. A fluid sidestep, so smooth it looked like he'd simply melted out of the way. Hawk's fist whistled through empty air. Before Hawk could recover, Stephen's hand shot out like a striking snake and grabbed Hawk's wrist mid-swing. His grip was iron. Then he twisted. Hard. There was a sickening sirake. The sound of ligaments tearing, joints bending in ways they were never meant to. Hawk's eyes went wide with shock and pain. He opened his mouth to scream, but Stephen didn't give him the chance. Stephen drove his elbow up and into Hawk's ribs with surgical precision, a short, brutal strike that landed right between the fourth and fifth rib. Another sirake, sharper this time. Bone-breaking. Hawk's scream died in his throat, replaced by a wet, gasping wheeze as his lung collapsed from the impact. He stumbled backward, clutching his side, his face going pale. His legs buckled. 270 pounds of muscle and menace crashed to the tile floor like a felled tree. Hawk lay there gasping, wheezing, trying desperately to suck air into his damaged lung. Blood trickled from his mouth. The entire exchange had taken less than 3 seconds. For a moment, Hawk's crew just stood there, frozen in shock. Their leader, the man they thought was invincible, was on the ground, broken, bleeding. Then reality snapped back. Get him, one of them yelled, his voice cracking with fear and fury. 2 men rushed in from opposite sides, thinking they could overwhelm Stephen with numbers. The first one swung a shiv in a wide, desperate arc. Stephen didn't block it. He stepped into the attack, closing the distance so fast the man didn't have time to adjust. Stephen caught the man's wrist, redirected the momentum, and used the man's own force against him. One smooth motion, twist, sweep palm strike. The man's legs went out from under him. Stephen drove his palm into the man's chest with devastating force. Not a punch, but a focused strike that compressed the rib cage and knocked every ounce of air from his lungs. The man hit the tile face, first with a wet smeske, unconscious before he even landed. The second attacker came in low, trying to tackle Stephen around the waist. Bad idea. Stephen dropped his center of gravity, braced himself, and brought his knee up to meet the man's face. Crunch. The man's nose exploded in a spray of blood. He staggered backward, hands clutching his ruined face, screaming. Stephen didn't pursue. He simply stepped back into the center of the room, breathing steady, eyes scanning the remaining 4 men. The third man came at him with the sock full of batteries, swinging it like a medieval flail. Stephen ducked under the first swing, feeling the weapon whistle past his ear. On the backswing, Stephen caught the man's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him face first into the tile wall. Blood sprayed across the white tiles in a crimson arc. The man slid down the wall and didn't get back up. The fourth man had a razor blade come and was more cautious, circling, looking for an opening. Come on, old man, he muttered, trying to sound brave. I'm gonna cut you up. Stephen didn't respond. He just watched, waited, patient as stone. The man lunged, slashing wildly. Stephen caught his wrist mid-strike, twisted sharply, and the weapon clattered to the wet floor. Then Stephen drove his elbow into the side of the man's head, a precise strike to the temple. The man's eyes rolled back. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. 4 down, 2 still standing. The remaining 2 members of Hawk's crew backed toward the door, weapons trembling in their hands, eyes wide with terror. They'd come in here thinking this would be easy. An old man, outnumbered 7 to 1. Armed against unarmed. But now 4 of their crew were on the ground, bleeding and broken. And Stephen Seagal stood in the center of the room, water and blood mixing on the tile around him, breathing steady, barely winded. He looked at the 2 remaining men with calm, emotionless eyes. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Walk away now. They didn't need to be told twice. They dropped their weapons, scrambled for the door, yanked it open, and ran. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, fading into the distance. Stephen stood alone in the shower room, surrounded by broken men. Big Hawk was still on the ground, wheezing, clutching his shattered ribs, his face contorted in pain and humiliation. Stephen walked over and knelt beside him. Hawk looked up with hatred and fear in his eyes. You're dead, Hawk gasped. You hear me? Dead. Stephen's expression didn't change. You wanted to know if I was tough, Stephen said quietly, his voice almost gentle. Now you know. He stood up, leaving Hawk on the cold tile. Then he calmly walked to the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the hallway. Behind him, Hawk's gasping breaths echoed in the empty shower room. The guards found Hawk and his crew 20 minutes later, all of them alive, but broken. Hawk was rushed to the infirmary with 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and a shattered wrist. His crew followed, sporting broken noses, concussions, and fractured bones. When the guards asked what happened, none of them would talk. They just stared at the walls, silent, traumatized. Steven Seagal was back in his cell, sitting calmly on his bunk, reading a worn paperback someone had left behind. When the guards came to question him, he looked up with innocent eyes. I took a shower, he said simply. Then I came back here. The guards didn't believe him, but they couldn't prove anything, no witnesses, no cameras, and Hawk's crew refused to testify, so they let him be. Type RESPT in the comments if this story inspired you. Let those letters fill the screen. Show me that you believe in standing for what's right, no matter the cost, and tell us, which part of Stephen's journey resonated with you the most? Was it the shower fight where he defended himself against impossible odds? Was it the moment he chose to help the warden instead of just taking the deal? Was it watching him walk out of those gates as a free man? Word spread through Iron Gate Penitentiary like wildfire racing through dry brush. By dinner that evening, every single inmate in the facility had heard some version of what happened in the showers. The stories grew with each retelling, becoming more elaborate, more mythical. Some said Stephen had taken down 10 men, not 6. Others claimed he'd killed Big Hawk with a single touch to a pressure point. One wild rumor even suggested he'd fought off 15 armed inmates using nothing but a bar of soap and pure willpower. But the core truth remained the same. Whispered in awe-struck tones throughout the cell blocks, Big Hawk, the untouchable king of Cell Block D, the man who'd ruled Iron Gate with an iron fist for over a decade, had been destroyed by an old man in under 30 seconds. Inmates gathered in clusters during yard time, speaking in hushed voices, casting nervous glances toward Stephen whenever he walked past. Some looked at him with newfound respect, nodding slightly when he met their eyes. Others looked terrified, quickly looking away, not wanting to accidentally provoke him. A few of the younger, more ambitious inmates watched him with calculating eyes, wondering if this was an opportunity, if taking down the man who took down Hawk would elevate their own status. But most just kept their distance. Steven Seagal had become something more than just another inmate. He'd become a legend overnight, the old man who walked into hell and came out without a scratch. But legends attract attention, and in a place like Iron Gate, attention from the wrong people could be just as dangerous as any physical threat. 2 days after the shower incident, Stephen was working his shift in the laundry room, methodically folding uniforms when a guard approached. Not one of the regular block guards, this one wore a different uniform, cleaner, more official. Seagal, the guard said, his voice neutral but carrying authority. Warden wants to see you. Now, the other inmates in the laundry room went silent, exchanging worried looks. Being summoned to the warden's office was never good news. It usually meant solitary confinement, loss of privileges, or being transferred to an even worse facility. Marcus, working a few stations down, caught Stephen's eye and gave him a subtle shake of his head, a silent warning. But Stephen simply nodded, set down the uniform he'd been folding, and followed the guard without hesitation. They walked through the maze of corridors, past locked gates and security checkpoints, each one clanging shut behind them with heavy finality. Other inmates pressed themselves against the bars of their cells as Stephen passed, watching him like he was already a ghost. Finally, they reached the administrative wing, a cleaner, quieter part of the prison where the air didn't smell like sweat and desperation. The guard knocked twice on a heavy oak door. "Come in," a voice called from inside. Warden Thomas Cole sat behind a massive desk made of dark wood, the kind that spoke of authority and permanence. He was in his late 50s, with iron, gray hair cropped military short and a face carved from granite, hard lines, sharp angles, eyes that had seen too much and judged even more. Former Marine Corps, according to the commendations and photos on the wall behind him. Multiple combat deployments, medals for valor. A man who'd seen real violence and come out the other side still believing in something. He ran Iron Gate with an iron fist, but unlike Big Hawk's crude brutality, Cole's control came from discipline, structure, and an unwavering sense of order. He was hard, but he was fair. At least, that's what people said. The guard closed the door behind Stephen. Leaving them alone, Cole didn't speak immediately. He just studied Stephen with those sharp, calculating eyes, as if reading a book written in a language only he understood. The silence stretched out, filling the room like water rising in a sealed container. Finally, Cole leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of his face. "You know who I am?" Cole asked, his voice measured, controlled. "Yes, sir," Stephen replied calmly. "Warden Cole." "Good. Then you know I don't tolerate chaos in my prison." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. Stephen nodded slowly. "I understand, sir." Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. "What happened in the showers 2 days ago was self-defense." Stephen continued before Cole could speak. "I didn't start it. I didn't want it. But I wasn't going to let myself be beaten or killed without defending myself." Cole's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Acknowledgement. Maybe even a hint of approval. "I know," Cole said simply. "I've reviewed the footage." Stephen blinked, surprised. "Footage? I thought there were no cameras in the showers." A ghost of a smile touched Cole's lips. "There aren't. Not officially." He turned his computer monitor so Stephen could see it. On the screen was grainy, black, and white footage from a hidden camera, showing the entire fight from a high angle, every movement, every strike, every broken bone. "I have eyes everywhere in this facility, Seagal. Everywhere that matters." Cole paused the video on a frame showing Stephen standing calmly in the center of the room while Hawk's crew lay broken around him. Hawk and his crew were armed. You weren't. They outnumbered you 7-1. You used only the force necessary to neutralize the threats, and you stopped the moment they were no longer a danger. He closed the laptop and looked directly at Stephen. "You're a trained fighter. A highly trained fighter." It wasn't a question, so Stephen didn't answer. Cole leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "I did some digging after you arrived. Made some calls, pulled some strings." He opened a manila folder on his desk and began reading. Stephen Seagal, martial arts instructor for 35 years. Multiple black belts in Aikido, Karate, Judo, Kendo. Former consultant for law enforcement agencies across 3 states. You've trained special forces units, SWAT teams, federal agents. Cole looked up. You've also been involved in several high-profile cases involving corporate espionage, organized crime, and government corruption. Stephen remained silent, his face neutral. Cole closed the folder and leaned back again. "So I'll ask you directly, what the hell are you doing in my prison?" Stephen held his gaze for a long moment before answering. "I was set up, sir." "By who?" "People who didn't like what I knew. People with enough money and power to make problems disappear." Cole studied him intently, as if using some internal lie detector honed over decades of dealing with criminals. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I believe you." Stephen felt something loosen in his chest, not hope exactly, but acknowledgement. Someone in authority actually believed him. Cole stood and walked to the window overlooking the prison yard below. Inmates moved like ants through the concrete maze, trapped in their routines, their violence, their desperation. "Here's the situation, Seagal," Cole said, his back still turned. "You just took down the most dangerous man in this facility. That makes you a target now. Every gang member, every wannabe tough guy, every ambitious punk who thinks taking you down will make them the new king." He turned to face Stephen. "You've painted a target on your back the size of Texas. I can handle myself." "Sir," Stephen said calmly, "I know you can. I just watched you handle 7 armed men like they were children." Cole walked back to his desk but didn't sit. "That's the problem." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm offering you a deal, Seagal. But before I do, I need you to understand something about me." He gestured to the commendations on the wall. "I spent 20 years in the Marines. I've seen corruption up close, officers taking bribes, politicians covering up war crimes, good men dying because someone somewhere decided their lives were worth less than money or convenience." His voice hardened. "When I took this job 10 years ago, I swore I'd run a clean facility. No bribes, no corruption. Justice, order, and rehabilitation." He laughed bitterly, but Iron Gate was already rotten when I arrived. Guards on the take, gangs running drugs, weapons, contraband through corridors like it was a damn shopping mall. I've been trying to clean this place up for a decade, and every time I cut off one head, 2 more grow back. Cole sat down heavily, suddenly looking older, more tired. "I can't do it alone, Seagal. I've tried. God knows I've tried." He looked up and Stephen saw something unexpected in those hard eyes, vulnerability, exhaustion, and a desperate kind of hope. "I need help. Real help. From someone I can trust." Stephen's eyes narrowed. "What kind of help?" Cole leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I've got a problem. Multiple problems, actually. Guards smuggling contraband. Gang leaders coordinating operations from inside their cells. A supply chain that runs from the outside straight into my prison, and I can't figure out who's running it. He tapped the folder on his desk. You're not part of the system. You don't owe anyone anything. You're not part of any gang, any faction, any alliance. And from what I've seen, he gestured to the laptop. You've got skills that could actually make a difference. Stephen began to understand where this was going. You want me to work for you, he said slowly, to be your eyes and ears inside the prison. More than that, Cole said, I want you to help me root out the corruption, find the dirty guards, identify the gang leaders, trace the supply lines, gather evidence. He paused. Help me clean this place up from the inside. Stephen was quiet for a long moment, considering. And what do I get in return? Cole reached into his desk and pulled out another folder, this one thicker. I've got connections, Seagal. Lawyers who owe me favors. Judges I served with. FBI agents I worked with during my time in the corps. He slid the folder across the desk. You help me fix Arngate, and I'll make sure your case gets a second look. A real investigation, not the railroad job you got the first time. Stephen picked up the folder, flipping through page after page of legal documents, contact information, case files. It was real. This was a real offer. I can't promise you'll walk free, Cole said honestly, but I can promise you a fair shot. A chance to prove your innocence. Maybe even get your conviction overturned. He extended his hand across the desk. Do we have a deal? Stephen looked at the hand, then at Cole's face, searching for any sign of deception. He found none. Just a tired man trying to do the right thing in a place designed to break good intentions. Stephen thought about Big Hawk. About the corruption he'd already seen in just a few days. About the inmates suffering under a system designed to exploit them. About justice. Finally, he reached out and shook Cole's hand. I'll do it, Stephen said. But not just for the deal. Cole raised an eyebrow. Then why? Stephen met his eyes with quiet intensity. Because it's the right thing to do. For the first time since Stephen had entered the office, Warden Cole smiled. A genuine smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. That's exactly why I picked you, Seagal. He released Stephen's hand and stood. Welcome to the team. We start tomorrow. Over the next 2 weeks, Stephen Seagal became something he'd never been before in his entire life. A spy inside one of the most dangerous prisons in America. It required a completely different skill set than fighting. This wasn't about physical confrontation or martial arts expertise. This was about patience, observation, learning to see the invisible threads that connected the corruption, running through Irongate like poison in the bloodstream. And Stephen was surprisingly good at it. His age, ironically, became his greatest asset. Inmates saw an old man and underestimated him. Guards dismissed him as just another aging convict serving out his final years. Nobody suspected that behind those calm, weathered eyes was a mind cataloging every detail, every transaction, every whispered conversation. He moved through the prison like a ghost, watching, listening, learning the rhythms and patterns of criminal enterprise operating in plain sight. Warden Cole had given him a small notebook, disguised to look like a worn copy of a religious text. Inside, Stephen documented everything he observed in careful, coded handwriting. Every morning at dawn, he passed the notebook through a dead drop in the chapel, a loose brick behind the altar where Cole's most trusted guard would retrieve it. By evening, a new notebook would appear with Cole's instructions and questions, guiding Stephen's investigation deeper into the heart of the corruption. Over the next 2 weeks, Stephen Seagal became something he'd never been before in his entire life, a spy inside one of the most dangerous prisons in America. It required a completely different skill set than fighting. This wasn't about physical confrontation or martial arts expertise. This was about patience, observation, learning to see the invisible threads that connected the corruption running through Irongate like poison in the bloodstream. And Stephen was surprisingly good at it. His age, ironically, became his greatest asset. Inmates saw an old man and underestimated him. Guards dismissed him as just another aging convict serving out his final years. Nobody suspected that behind those calm, weathered eyes was a mind cataloging every detail, every transaction, every whispered conversation. He moved through the prison like a ghost, watching, listening, learning the rhythms and patterns of criminal enterprise operating in plain sight. Warden Cole had given him a small notebook, disguised to look like a worn copy of a religious text. Inside, Stephen documented everything he observed in careful, coded handwriting. Every morning at dawn, he passed the notebook through a dead drop in the chapel, a loose brick behind the altar where Cole's most trusted guard would retrieve it. By evening, a new notebook would appear with Cole's instructions and questions, guiding Stephen's investigation deeper into the heart of the corruption. Over the next 2 weeks, Stephen Seagal became something he'd never been before in his entire life. A spy inside one of the most dangerous prisons in America. It required a completely different skill set than fighting. This wasn't about physical confrontation or martial arts expertise. This was about patience, observation, learning to see the invisible threads that connected the corruption running through Iron Gate like poison in the bloodstream. And Stephen was surprisingly good at it. His age, ironically, became his greatest asset. Inmates saw an old man and underestimated him. Guards dismissed him as just another aging convict serving out his final years. Nobody suspected that behind those calm, weathered eyes was a mind cataloging every detail, every transaction, every whispered conversation. He moved through the prison like a ghost, watching, listening, learning the rhythms and patterns of criminal enterprise operating in plain sight. Warden Cole had given him a small notebook, disguised to look like a worn copy of a religious text. Inside, Stephen documented everything he observed in careful, coded handwriting. Every morning at dawn, he passed the notebook through a dead drop in the chapel, a loose brick behind the altar, where Cole's most trusted guard would retrieve it. By evening, a new notebook would appear with Cole's instructions and questions, guiding Stephen's investigation deeper into the heart of the corruption. The first breakthrough came during yard time, 6 days into the operation. Stephen had positioned himself near the basketball court, seemingly reading his Bible, but actually watching a specific corner of the yard where money and contraband regularly changed hands. He'd noticed a pattern every Tuesday and Friday. 3 guards would rotate their positions at exactly 20:15 p.m., creating a 60-second blind spot. During that window, inmates would rush to a specific drainage grate, retrieve packages and disappear back into the crowd. Stephen watched it happen 3 times before he decided to act. On the 4th occurrence, he casually walked near the drainage grate just as an inmate named Torres was stuffing something into his jumpsuit. Stephen, accidentally, bumped into him, causing Torres to drop one of the packages. Pills. Dozens of them wrapped in plastic. "Sorry, brother," Stephen said, helping Torres gather them. Clumsy old feet. Torres looked panicked for a moment, then realized Stephen was alone and seemed harmless. "Just keep your mouth shut, old man," Torres hissed, "or you'll end up in a body bag." Stephen nodded submissively and shuffled away. That night, he documented everything: the guard's rotation pattern, the timing, the drainage grate's location, Torres's name, the type of pills. Cole's response came the next morning: "Good work. Keep watching. We need the supply chain, not just the dealers." Stephen's second target was the kitchen. Inmates whispered about a protection racket run by a gang called the Nordy Kings. They controlled food distribution, meaning they could make your life comfortable or miserable, depending on whether you paid tribute. Stephen volunteered for kitchen duty, claiming he wanted to stay busy. The head cook, a massive man named Gomez with tattooed tears under his eyes, looked at him suspiciously. "You sure, old man? Kitchen work is hard. I've done harder," Stephen replied calmly. Gomez shrugged. "Your funeral." For 3 days, Stephen worked quietly, peeling potatoes, washing dishes, keeping his head down and his eyes open. He noticed that certain inmates received extra portions, better quality food, sometimes even contraband items hidden inside bread loaves or hollowed-out vegetables. He noticed guards entering through the back delivery entrance during their breaks, leaving with bulging bags they definitely didn't arrive with. But most importantly, he noticed the pattern: every delivery truck that arrived was checked by the same guard, a thick-necked man named Officer Braddock. Braddock would inspect the cargo, sign the paperwork, and then certain boxes would be diverted to a separate storage room that was always kept locked. Only senior kitchen staff and specific guards had keys to that room. Stephen needed to get inside. On his 5th day in the kitchen, opportunity arrived in the form of a clumsy accident. Gomez dropped his key ring while hauling a sack of flour. The keys skidded across the greasy floor, stopping near Stephen's station. Stephen picked them up, but instead of handing them back immediately, he stumbled, sending the keys sliding under a prep table. "Damn it," Gomez muttered, getting on his hands and knees to retrieve them. In those precious seconds, Stephen's trained fingers identified the storage room key, pressed it into a bar of soap he'd prepared in advance, creating a perfect impression. By the time Gomez retrieved his keys, Stephen was back to peeling potatoes as if nothing had happened. That night, using a makeshift file created from a sharpened piece of metal stolen from the workshop, Stephen carved a duplicate key from a piece of hard plastic. It wasn't perfect, but it might work. 2 nights later, during a shift change when the kitchen was empty, Stephen used his makeshift key to open the storage room. Inside, he found exactly what Cole suspected. Boxes of contraband that had nothing to do with food supplies, cigarettes by the carton, pills in bulk containers, cell phones still in packaging, even small packages of drugs wrapped in vacuum, sealed plastic. Stephen documented everything with the small camera Cole had smuggled to him, a device no bigger than a button, hidden in his Bible. Click, 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 evidence. He locked the room behind him and disappeared back into the shadows. The third target was harder: the guards themselves. Stephen had identified 3 guards who were definitely dirty: Officer Braddock from the kitchen, Officer Chen who worked cell block C, and Officer Martinez who controlled access to the visitation area. But they were careful. They never handled contraband directly where inmates could see. They communicated in code. They covered their tracks. Stephen needed to catch them in the act. He spent days observing their patterns, learning their routines, identifying their weaknesses. Chen liked to gamble. He ran poker games in the guard break room and often owed money. Martinez had a drinking problem. His breath reeked of alcohol by afternoon shift, and he made mistakes when he was drunk. Braddock was greedy. He skimmed from every operation he touched, taking more than his fair share. Stephen used these weaknesses like pressure points in a fight. He arranged for an inmate who owed Chen money to, accidentally, leave cash in plain sight, forcing Chen to make a decision: report it or pocket it. Chen pocketed it. Stephen photographed the whole thing. He anonymously reported Martinez's drinking to internal affairs, knowing it would put Martinez under pressure, making him sloppy. Sure enough, Martinez started taking risks, accepting bribes in more visible locations. Stephen documented it all, and Braddock. Stephen simply followed the money. Every payment Braddock received eventually led back to a single source: a weekly visitor who came to see an inmate named Valdez in cell block A. The visitor was always the same, a woman in her 40s, well-dressed, carrying an expensive purse. Stephen watched from a distance as she visited Valdez every Wednesday at 2 p.m. 30 minutes later, Braddock would make a routine check of the visitation area, and the woman would slip him an envelope before leaving. Stephen photographed the exchange from 3 different angles using strategic positioning and timing. When he delivered the evidence to Cole, the warden's face turned grim. "This is bigger than I thought," Cole muttered, flipping through the photos. "If Valdez is coordinating from inside, that means..." He trailed off, realization dawning. "That means someone on the outside is running the whole operation." Stephen finished. "Someone with resources, connections, and protection." Cole nodded slowly. "The kingpin." Over the following days, Stephen and Cole worked together to piece together the puzzle. Every drug deal, every bribe, every act of violence inside Iron Gate traced back through a complex network of inmates, guards, and outside connections. But all roads eventually led to one name that kept appearing in coded messages, whispered conversations, and financial transactions: Reeves. At first, Cole dismissed it. "Can't be. That's a common name. Could be anyone." But Stephen persisted, digging deeper, following every thread, and then he found the connection. Captain James Reeves, head of the guard rotation, 15-year veteran of Iron Gate, decorated officer with a spotless record, trusted, respected, untouchable. Stephen discovered that Reeves had access to every part of the prison. He controlled guard assignments, approved all delivery schedules, and had override authority on security protocols. If you wanted to smuggle something into Iron Gate, you needed Reeves to look the other way. If you wanted protection from other inmates, Reeves could arrange it. If you wanted to run a criminal empire from inside a maximum security prison, Reeves was your man. Stephen brought the evidence to Cole: financial records showing unexplained deposits in offshore accounts, intercepted communications using guard radio codes, testimony from inmates willing to talk in exchange for protection. It all pointed to Reeves. Cole's face went deathly pale as he reviewed the evidence. He sat down heavily in his chair, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "Reeves," he whispered. "Jesus Christ, Reeves." He looked up at Stephen with something close to devastation in his eyes. "I served with him 15 years ago in the Corps. He saved my life during a deployment in Afghanistan. That's why I brought him here when I became warden. I trusted him completely." Stephen placed a hand on Cole's shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. "The best betrayals always come from the people we trust most," Stephen said quietly. "That's what makes them betrayals." Cole nodded, jaw clenched, fighting to maintain composure. Then his expression hardened, transforming from shock to cold determination. "If we're going to take him down, we need to be smart," Cole said, his voice steady again, the Marine coming back to the surface. "He's got allies, inside and outside this facility, guards who are loyal to him, inmates who depend on him, maybe even people in the State Corrections Department. Then we hit him fast and hard, Stephen said, echoing his earlier words. Before he knows we're coming. Before he can destroy evidence or call in favors. Cole stood, walked to his safe, and pulled out a secure phone. I've got contacts in the FBI. Agents who specialize in corruption cases. We bring them in, coordinate a simultaneous raid, internal and external. He looked at Stephen. Can you get me proof? Hard evidence. Something that will hold up in federal court. Stephen nodded. I'll get it. What do you need? Video or audio of him directly handling contraband or taking a bribe. That's the gold standard. Everything else is circumstantial. Stephen's mind was already working, calculating angles, timing opportunities. There's a shipment coming in next Tuesday. I overheard Braddock talking about it. Biggest delivery of the month. Cole's eyes sharpened. Reeves will be there to oversee it personally. He always is for the big ones. Then that's when we get him. The next few days were a blur of careful planning. Cole coordinated with FBI agents outside, arranging for a team to be ready to move the moment they had evidence. Stephen positioned himself to have eyes on the loading dock where the Tuesday delivery would arrive. He recruited Marcus, the old inmate who'd warned him about Big Hawk, to create a distraction if needed. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake and Reeves would disappear behind his authority and connections, untouchable. Tuesday arrived cold and gray, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. Stephen was in position by 11 p.m., hidden in the shadows near the loading dock, the button camera concealed in his hand. At exactly midnight, headlights cut through the darkness. A large delivery truck backed up to the dock, its brake lights glowing red in the gloom. The rear door rolled up, revealing boxes stacked floor to ceiling. Then Reeves appeared, flanked by Braddock and Chen. All three were in full uniform, looking completely professional, completely legitimate. The truck driver, a nervous-looking man in his 30s, jumped down and handed Reeves a clipboard. Reeves signed it without reading, then gestured to the truck. Let's make this quick, Reeves said. We've got 30 minutes before the next guard rotation. They began unloading specific boxes, not the ones marked with food supplies, but identical boxes with slightly different serial numbers. Stephen filmed everything, barely breathing, fighting to keep his hands steady. Braddock opened one of the boxes with a crowbar. Inside vacuum-sealed packages of drugs, cartons of cigarettes, dozens of cell phones. Reeves reached in, grabbed a duffel bag from the bottom, and unzipped it cash. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills. This is good, Reeves said, his voice clear in the quiet night. This is very good. He pulled out several stacks, counted them quickly, and pocketed a portion. Your cut, he said to Braddock and Chen, handing them each an envelope. Stephen zoomed in, capturing every detail. This was it. The evidence Cole needed. Then Reeves looked directly toward Stephen's hiding spot. Stephen's blood turned to ice. Had he been spotted? Who's there? Reeves called out, his hand moving to his weapon. Stephen remained perfectly still, barely breathing, invisible in the shadows. Braddock shined a flashlight in Stephen's direction, the beam sweeping across the wall just inches from where he stood. Probably just a rat, Braddock muttered. Check it anyway, Reeves ordered. Braddock started walking toward Stephen's position. Stephen had seconds to decide: run and lose the evidence, or stay and risk being caught. He chose option 3. Just as Braddock reached the corner, Stephen stepped out into the light, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, playing the role of a confused old inmate. What the hell are you doing here? Braddock demanded, raising his baton. I got lost. Stephen stammered, his voice trembling perfectly. I was looking for the bathroom. I'm sorry, I didn't see nothing. I swear. Reeves studied him for a long moment, suspicious. Then recognition flickered across his face. You're Seagal, the guy who put Big Hawk in the infirmary. Stephen nodded meekly. Yes, sir. What are you really doing here, Seagal? Just what I said, Captain. Got turned around. Old man memory ain't what it used to be. Reeves's eyes narrowed. Then he smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. Take him to solitary, Reeves told Braddock. Keep him there until I decide what to do with him. Yes, sir. Braddock grabbed Stephen's arm roughly and started dragging him away. Stephen went willingly, head down, looking defeated. But in his hand, hidden in his palm, was the button camera, and on that camera was everything they needed. Stephen spent the next 18 hours in solitary confinement, a concrete box barely 6 feet wide and 8 feet long. No windows. A single dim bulb that never turned off. A metal toilet in the corner. A concrete slab for a bed with no mattress. The kind of place designed to break a man's spirit through isolation and sensory deprivation. But Stephen had been in worse places. He'd survived interrogation rooms in hostile countries. He'd meditated in caves during winter storms. He'd learned long ago that true freedom existed in the mind, not the body. So he sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly, centered and calm, and he waited. He knew Cole would have received the camera by now. Marcus had been instructed to retrieve it from the dead drop and deliver it directly to the warden's office if Stephen didn't return within 2 hours. The question was, would Cole act fast enough? Or would Reeves realize what had happened and destroy the evidence before it could be used? The answer came at dawn. Stephen heard them before he saw them. Footsteps in the corridor. Multiple sets, moving with purpose and authority. Keys rattled in the lock. The door swung open, flooding the dark cell with harsh fluorescent light. But it wasn't Reeves or Braddock standing there. It was Warden Cole, flanked by 6 men in dark suits with FBI credentials hanging from their necks. Behind them, in handcuffs, were Captain Reeves, Officer Braddock, and Officer Chen. Reeves's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. When he saw Stephen sitting calmly on the floor, his expression twisted into something ugly. "You," Reeves snarled. "You son of a, that's enough," one of the FBI agents said sharply, yanking Reeves backward. Cole stepped into the cell and extended his hand to Stephen. "It's over, Seagal. We got them. All of them." Stephen took Cole's hand and stood, his joints protesting slightly after 18 hours on concrete, but his spirit unbroken. "The camera?" Stephen asked. Cole smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile. "Perfect. Crystal clear footage of Reeves handling contraband, distributing bribes, the whole operation. The FBI executed simultaneous raids at dawn. Here, the truck driver's warehouse, the supplier's offices. They're rolling up the entire network." He clapped Stephen on the shoulder. "You did it. You actually did it." As they walked Stephen out of solitary, past the handcuffed guards being led away, Reeves locked eyes with him one final time. "You have no idea what you've done?" Reeves hissed. "You have no idea who you're messing with. There are people above me, Seagal. People with real power. This isn't over." Stephen stopped, turned, and looked Reeves directly in the eye with absolute calm. "I know exactly who I'm messing with," Stephen said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "And I'm not afraid." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Reeves to face the consequences of his choices. 3 weeks later, Stephen stood in Warden Cole's office one last time, but this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The desk was covered with legal documents, official letters and case files, and sitting in the center of it all was a single sheet of paper with a state seal at the top. Cole picked it up and handed it to Stephen. "Your lawyer came through," Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. "New evidence, witness testimony, an independent investigation that uncovered the people who framed you." Stephen's hands trembled slightly as he read the document. Order of exoneration. Conviction overturned. All charges dismissed. Immediate release authorized. "You're a free man, Seagal." Stephen looked up, and for the first time since entering Iron Gate, his eyes were wet with emotion he couldn't quite contain. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Cole replied. "You earned this. Not just by helping me clean up this prison, but by never losing who you were in here." Stephen set the document down and walked to the window overlooking the yard one last time. Below, inmates moved through their routines. But something had changed in the 3 weeks since Reeves's arrest. New guards had been hired, carefully vetted. Honest men and women who actually believed in rehabilitation. The contraband network had been dismantled. The gangs were still there, but their power had been broken. And more importantly, Cole had implemented new programs, education classes, counseling services, job training, small changes. But changes nonetheless. "What about the inmates?" Stephen asked quietly. "What happens to them now?" Cole moved to stand beside him at the window. "What about them? They need someone who cares. Not just guards who watch them, they need mentors. Real programs, education, skills, a chance to become something more than what this place expects them to be." Cole nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. "I'm working on it. Your actions here, they woke people up, Seagal. The State Corrections Department took notice. They're sending funding for new programs, rehabilitation specialists, educational resources." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Change is coming. Real change. It won't happen overnight, and it won't be perfect. But it's happening." He turned to Stephen. "And a lot of that is because of you. Because you showed everyone, inmates, guards, even me, that integrity still matters. That doing the right thing still makes a difference." Stephen extended his hand, and Cole shook it firmly, the handshake of 2 men who'd fought together in the trenches and emerged victorious. "Thank you, Warden. For believing me, for giving me a chance. Thank you, Seagal. You didn't just clean up this prison. You reminded us what justice actually looks like." 30 minutes later, Stephen walked through the main gate of Iron Gate Penitentiary. He was wearing civilian clothes that Cole had arranged for him. Simple jeans, a button-down shirt, a light jacket. No orange jumpsuit. No handcuffs. No chains, just freedom. The massive steel gates closed behind him with a heavy final clang that echoed across the parking lot. Stephen stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the sun on his face, the wind in his hair. For the first time in months, he breathed free air. The air tasted sweet, clean, filled with possibility. He looked back at the prison one last time. At the walls, the towers, the razor wire. Inside those walls, he'd faced some of the most dangerous men in America. He'd been threatened, attacked, tested in ways most people would never understand. But he'd never compromised, never bent, never broken. He'd stood for what was right, even when it would have been easier to look away. And now, standing on the other side of those walls, he understood something profound. True freedom wasn't about where you were. It was about who you chose to be. Stephen turned away from the prison, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the parking lot where a car was waiting to take him home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A new chapter was beginning, and Stephen Seagal was ready for whatever came next. Respect isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's not about being the biggest, the strongest, or the most intimidating. It's not about how many people fear you, or how much power you can force others to give you. True respect is about standing for what's right, even when the whole world is against you. Even when it's easier to stay silent. Even when speaking up might cost you everything. Stephen Seagal walked into Iron Gate Penitentiary as a victim of injustice, falsely accused, stripped of his freedom, thrown into one of the most dangerous places in America. The system had failed him. Powerful people had crushed him. Everything had been taken away. But they couldn't take who he was. He walked out of that prison as a legend, not because of the fights he won, not because he defeated Big Hawk or exposed Captain Reeves. He became a legend because he never stopped being who he was, regardless of where he was or what was happening around him. When Big Hawk tried to break him, he stood firm. When corruption surrounded him, he chose integrity. When violence came for him, he defended himself with precision and restraint, using only the force necessary and nothing more. When the warden asked for help, he didn't ask, "What's in it for me?" He asked, "What's the right thing to do?" That's the difference between power and strength. Power is taking what you want through force and fear. Strength is doing what's right even when no one is watching, even when there's no reward, even when it costs you everything. True strength isn't shown in how hard you can hit someone. It's shown in how calm you stay when everyone around you is trying to break you. It's shown in the choice to stand up rather than bow down. It's shown in the courage to be kind in a place designed to make you cruel. Stephen could have paid Big Hawk's tribute and lived quietly. He could have ignored the corruption and focused on his own survival. He could have fought dirty, become what the prison expected him to become. But he didn't. He chose a different path. The harder path, the more dangerous path, but the right path. And in the end, that choice didn't just save him. It changed an entire prison. It gave broken men hope that change was possible. It proved that one person standing for what's right can make a difference, even in the darkest places. So remember this, the world will test you. It will push you. It will try to make you compromise your values, abandon your principles, become someone you're not. There will be moments when doing the right thing seems impossible, when the cost feels too high, when everyone around you is choosing the easy path. In those moments, remember Stephen Seagal in that prison yard, standing alone against Big Hawk and his crew. Remember him calmly saying, "I don't apologize to bullies. And I don't pay for protection I don't need." Remember that true power is silent, but true strength speaks through action. And remember that respect is never demanded, it's earned. One choice at a time, one stand at a time, one moment of courage at a time.